Chapter 4. As Robbie, Boyden, and Angus rode into the Cone Horse Fairgrounds, Robbie winced at the pain in his back. He was healing quickly, as he always did, but the hour's ride from the farm hadn't done his back any good. He tethered Wild Thing securely away from the other horses. He didn't want her to wander the fairgrounds looking for him as she had the year before. It made people nervous when she did unusual things.
"Boy," his father yelled, "don't stand there dawdling. We have horses to buy."
"Come in, sir," Robbie called.
"Wasn't dawdling. Boyden's the one dawdling."
Boyden was ahead with a friend of his, flirting with a group of girls. Robbie averted his eyes. People didn't like it when he looked at their daughters. Tone Tormenstam and some of his relatives had beaten Robbie badly a couple of years ago for staring at his daughter too long. He'd had to grovel and swear never to look at a female again before they'd stop. Why would I want to look at their stupid daughters anyway? Shoving aside the unfairness of it, Robbie joined his father. The ring for the horse auction was large and had benches rising in tiers on 3 sides and a stable filled with horses on the 4th. As Robbie and Angus took their seats in the middle of the front row, a few people drew the Star of Sulis and moved farther away, leaving a bubble of empty space surrounding them. Angus didn't seem to notice, and Robbie pretended not to. He closed his eyes and concentrated on the stable. Even his father's money couldn't get him any closer. Some of the owners were afraid he'd curse their horses or something, but some of the same men would send for him if any of their animals ever fell ill.
They don't mind using the powers of darkness then. It doesn't matter. I can tell everything about a horse from here.
His father made a noise of disapproval, and Robbie opened his eyes, wondering what he'd done wrong this time, and praying Angus wouldn't hit him in front of the crowd. But for once, Angus's disapproval wasn't focused on Robbie. Robbie followed his father's scowl behind them. Suddenly, he found it difficult to breathe, as the most beautiful girl in Sulis's creation took a seat several rows behind them. Her auburn hair sparkled like Wild Thing's coat, and freckles dotted her nose. Her smile glistened in the sunlight, and he felt a tightness in his groin, not unlike the pleasant tingling he experienced when healing. His father elbowed him in the ribs.
"What in 7 hells do you think you're doing? You want to dangle from a tree?"
Only then did Robbie notice the 5 heavily armed men accompanying the lady. One had a face so badly scarred he looked like something out of a nightmare. Robbie turned quickly away. He'd never survive if that man took offense.
"Sulis cursed him. Why is it so bad if I look?"
He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, wondering what it would be like to actually touch a girl.
"Close your mouth, m'lady," Darhauer hissed. "You're blushing like a silly schoolgirl."
"Just who do you think you're commanding?" Samantha snapped, embarrassed she'd allowed herself to be so undignified over a peasant. But how could she help it? His emerald green eyes drew her. He looked at her the same way Devon looked at Aslan. Why does it have to be a peasant who looks at me like that? Samantha tore her eyes away from him. It hurt to want what would never be hers. So as the auction began, she tried to ignore the boy and watch the horses. It almost worked until the air around the boy erupted in color. Bronze, silver, and gold blended into an elaborate pattern. Holy Sulis, what does it mean? Am I truly mad? She knew she had to be, but her skin prickled with excitement she'd only dreamed of feeling. She wanted to get closer to him. She glanced around guiltily, but there was no one here who'd take the story back to court. Her bodyguards knew the consequences of gossiping about her, and Darhauer was too good a friend to do so. Before she could change her mind, she climbed over the row of seats in front of her.
"Well, lady, where are you going?"
Darhauer objected. "It's less crowded down there," she whispered, not wanting the boy to hear. Darhauer assessed the situation for one of his 597 imaginary threats to her safety, and then nodded. Followed by her men, she took a seat behind the boy. Fortunately, the peasant was so focused on the horse, he didn't notice. A huge, uncouth farmer sat beside the boy.
"Are you going to tell me this one's no better than the last one?"
The man sneered. Samantha decided the boy must be his servant, but that was no excuse for being so rude. Her father had taught her that treating inferiors with respect inspired loyalty, something far more valuable than mere obedience. The boy shook his head and didn't look at his master. His intestines aren't formed right. The owners doped him so he acts okay, but the horse is in bad shape and there's nothing I can do for him. Samantha could see nothing wrong with the horse, and she considered herself a good judge of horseflesh. The man, however, merely nodded. A gray stallion was brought out next. "This one?" the man asked in the same sneering tone. The boy shook his head again. "He's healthy enough, but he wouldn't work well for plowing, not with his temperament, not even if we galled him." Again the man accepted the boy's opinion without question. It made no sense. While relying completely on the boy's judgment, the man spoke to him like he was some garbage whose smell he found offensive. She scooted to the side so she could see the boy's face better. When the next horse was brought out, the boy briefly closed his eyes. Then he opened them and nodded to his master. He'd be perfect. Sturdy and healthy, good temperament. Without asking for more explanation, the man began bidding on the horse. Just what is he doing? Telling herself she merely wanted to understand how the boy knew so much about horses, Samantha climbed over the final tier of benches and sat near him. "You seem to have an astute understanding of horses," she said. The boy nearly tumbled over. Thank you, my lady." "Holy Sulis, I'm a dead man. Will her men kill me here or ambush me on the way home?" The lady looked between him and her men and rolled her eyes. "Don't worry, my men don't bite." Robbie wasn't at all sure about that, especially the scarred man, but the man said nothing. "Why did you approve this horse and reject the others?" she asked. As Angus made his final bid on the horse, Robbie wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers. He'd never dared speak to a beautiful girl before, and doing so now would likely bring him a load of trouble. Still, he couldn't just ignore her. "This one's good for plowing. The others weren't." "But how can you know that?" Robbie breathed in sharply as his father's hand closed on his thigh in a vice-like grip. "Do you have a problem?" the lady snapped, glaring at Angus. Robbie was humiliated that she thought she had to defend him. Weak, worthless worm. Angus abruptly released Robbie's thigh. "No, my lady. I just wanted to remind my son we have horses to buy." "Your son?" the lady said as if the idea appalled her. "I fail to see how my speaking to your son will prevent you from buying horses." Robbie was shocked. He'd never heard anyone speak to his father like that. He doubted he'd survived a beating if he tried it himself. "Forgive me, my lady," Angus said, scooting away and averting his eyes. Robbie could tell his father was seething, but didn't dare say more with Scarface and the rest of the lady's men glaring at him. The lady smiled in satisfaction and turned back to Robbie. "As I was asking, how can you tell?" Robbie hesitated, but the lady leaned towards him and put her hand on his thigh. "Please, I'm only curious, and I promise not to distract you." The lady's touch ignited something within him he didn't understand. Nobody ever touched him. Cullen Beaverstam hadn't even wanted his family near him. His father only touched him to punish him. She looked at him not as if he were a monster or a demon, but in the same way that girls looked at Boyden. It was almost worth dying for. "I can't explain it. I sort of feel, or hear, or sense. I don't know the word for it, but I can see them from the inside, know what they're like." The lady frowned as if the answer didn't satisfy her. "Tell me about this one, then," the lady said, as the next horse came into the ring. Robbie closed his eyes briefly and reached out to the horse. "It's a very calm, steady animal. It would be very good with small children, not too bad for plowing, but it certainly wouldn't do for riding long distances or racing. You'd be hard-pressed to get it to go faster than a walk." The lady nodded. He didn't know what she was thinking, but as each horse was brought into the ring, she asked about it. Her question showed she knew a lot about horses and liked them just about as much as he did. He felt like crying when his father bought the last horse they'd come for. He wanted to beg to be able to stay with the lady, but his father would never allow it.
"Come along, boy,"
Angus said, getting to his feet. Reluctantly, he started to rise, but the lady grabbed his arm. "Don't leave. I'd like to hear your opinion of the horse I mean to buy." She turned to his father.
"Surely you wouldn't mind giving me more of your son's time?"
Her expression dared him to refuse. Angus glanced at the scarred man, and Robbie couldn't believe his luck when his father walked away without another word. The lady frowned after Angus.
"Not a very pleasant man, your father, is he? I didn't realize he was your father at first. You don't look like him much."
"No, I don't," he answered uncertainly. "My brother resembles him more closely." "That's too bad for him," the lady beamed. "I'm glad I met the more handsome son."
"Is she blind? How can she not realize I'm a freak?"
But if the lady couldn't tell, he wasn't about to argue. The man with the badly scarred face cleared his throat.
"Milady, it's nearly time for the higher quality riding horses."
The lady ignored Scarface. Robbie wondered how she dared do that, but since he'd probably already done enough to either get himself hanged or beaten to death, he decided to savor every moment before he had to pay the penalty. Horses too expensive for his father's farm were led into the ring, and the lady asked his opinion on every one of them. She seemed to drink in his words, and repeatedly touched his thigh or his arm when calling his attention to something. He didn't dare touch her back. Remarkably, the scarred man only bid on animals Robbie judged favorably.
"That one's a beauty. Healthy, too,"
Robbie said as a fine white mare entered the ring. It was a gorgeous Mentarian with a small head, graceful arched neck, and well-defined withers typical of the breed. It moved with a smoothness and ease that seemed almost like dancing. Robbie had seen Mentarians at horse fairs before, but not often.
"This is a horse I recommend your milady," Scarface said. "It is a magnificent animal."
Robbie nodded in agreement.
"That she is. A fine mare for a lady. Very gentle. Wouldn't give you a bit of trouble."
The lady turned to the scar man and narrowed her eyes.
"A fine mare for a lady?"
she repeated in a tone Robbie didn't understand. The two glared at each other as if having a silent argument. Scarface then snorted.
"As you wish, milady."
Robbie didn't understand what had just happened, or why the lady didn't want such a beautiful horse. But she seemed very pleased with herself. Scarface bought several of the horses at prices that would beggar the entire valley, but the lady grew increasingly irritated.
"Why do I have to buy a white one?" she hissed at Scarface.
Before Scarface could answer, another white mare entered the ring. The Corthian Drat reared, pawed the air, and fought to get away from her handler. Robbie whistled in admiration.
"What a magnificent animal! She's almost a match for Wilding."
The horse had strong, clean-cut shoulders, long, muscular forelegs, and a broad head indicating her intelligence. She was 16 hands high and of a white so pure she sparkled in the sunlight. The lady would look stunning on the horse. It was too bad no lady could ride such a high-strung and spirited beast. The lady looked wistfully at the mare. "This isn't a fine mare for a lady, is it?" Robbie shook his head.
"No, milady. She's a glorious animal, but she's very high-spirited. It would take a strong and talented horseman to ride her."
"Or horsewoman," milady corrected. Scarface thrust his face between them.
"Milady, you can not. You will buy him."
She cut Scarface off. The man glared menacingly, but he bought the horse. Robbie couldn't imagine what it would be like to have a man who looked like that obey him, and he wasn't at all sure buying the horse was a good idea. The lady stood.
"I'd like to go look at the vendor stalls now."
Scarface opened his mouth, but the lady cut him off again. "No need to disturb yourself. I'm sure this boy—" She paused and looked meaningfully at Robbie.
"Robbie," he supplied awkwardly. "I'm sure Robbie will accompany me, won't you?"
He jumped to his feet. He would have walked through fire if she asked him to.
"Certainly, my lady."
To his intense surprise, the lady took his hand and led him away. Two of the armed men trailed behind them. Robbie glanced at them nervously, but the lady paid them no attention. She drew him towards the vendor's stall, complaining about Scarface.
"I can't believe Darhauer was trying to get me to buy another lady's mare. That's just like him."
"He has a point," You'll break your neck if you try to ride the horse you bought. That mare will need careful handling." The lady let go of his hand and put her hands on his hips. "Are you questioning my ability to handle a horse? You think I'm incompetent because I'm a woman? There isn't a horse in my father's stable I can't handle. Darhauer says I'm an expert horsewoman." "I'm sure you are, my lady," he said, sick at having offended the only person who'd ever wanted him around. The lady rolled her eyes, and Robbie saw her mouth the word men. She started walking away. Why did I have to say something so stupid? But the lady turned back. "Aren't you coming?" Beaming with relief, he caught up with her. Again she took his hand. "With the way Darhauer was acting, I shouldn't blame you. He's just worried about getting in trouble with my father. I blackmailed him into taking me with him today." "You blackmailed him?" Robbie asked. She laughed, and it was such a beautiful laugh, Robbie couldn't help joining her. "He's not as fierce as he looks, and it wasn't blackmail exactly." The lady told him a story of a stable lad vomiting on some count's shoes, and Darhauer's request that she save the boy's job. Robbie couldn't imagine a life that included counts yelling at stable boys. Her father must be a very important man. Why would she choose to be with me when she could have anyone she wanted? "Your father will surely have a fine stable with the horses your man bought today." "Father has a magnificent stable. Fortunately, he doesn't pay too much attention to it. Darhauer might be in a lot of trouble if my father found out he lets me ride Horror. Horror requires a strong and talented horsewoman, but he nearly flies across the fields. I haven't yet found a fence he couldn't jump. Riding a horse like that makes me feel freer than anything." Robbie smiled at the image of the lady flying across the fields with him and Wild Thing riding beside her. "I know what you mean. My mare's like that." "She is? Is she here?" "Yes, she's picketed over that way." He pointed to the far side of the fairgrounds. "Is she a match for my new horse?" Robbie looked away. "I'm afraid she's more than a match." The lady laughed again. "You must show me this paragon of horseflesh." "Certainly, my lady," the peasant boy said. "But we'll have to be careful. She's a bit temperamental." Samantha thought it sweet the boy thought his peasant horse was an equal to the one she'd just purchased. The boy's hand was warm in hers as he led her through the fairgrounds. It was rough and calloused as a man's hand should be. She paused at a fruit vendor's cart. "Does your mare like apples?" "Oh, yes, my lady. Wild Thing loves apples." "Wild Thing?" Samantha paid for the biggest and juiciest-looking apple in the pile. The boy looked slightly embarrassed, but with his dark skin, it was harder to tell if he was blushing. "She isn't really tame. She won't let anyone but me ride her." What more could I ask for? Incredibly handsome and an expert with horses. Why aren't any of the men at court like him? He led her to the edge of the fairgrounds. They passed the other picketed horses, and the princess saw one horse off by itself. When they drew closer, she gasped. "That's Wild Thing," the boy said. She grabbed tightly to the boy's arm, unable to believe what she was seeing. "That's a horse, Dad." "But nobody can tame a horse, Dad." The boy shrugged, looking unsure of himself. "Like I said, my lady, she isn't really tame." Suddenly it dawned on her. "You're an Amahealer like the Princess Danu." The boy's eyes widened. "An Amahealer? No, I'm not any kind of sorcerer." "You read horses' minds. You ride a horse, Dad. Holy Sulis, Robbie, if you're not a sorcerer, what are you?" "A demon," the boy blurted. "That's what the people around here say." "A demon? That's absurd." Before he could say any more, the horse Dad neighed and tugged at her picket line. Robbie hurried to the mare's side. She calmed at his touch. Samantha crept closer. "Is something wrong?" Robbie scratched the mare's neck. The horse snorted and pawed the ground. "Not really. She just wonders when you're going to stop talking and give her the apple." Samantha laughed. "Will she let me feed it to her? Had you better?" "You can. She says she likes you." Samantha approached warily. A thrill ran through her as Wild Thing ate the apple out of her hand. Trembling, she patted the mare's nose. She couldn't help whispering, "I've always loved the stories about Danu's horse, Dad. I never dreamed I'd ever get close enough to actually touch one." The boy was so close to her, their hips touched. "Wild Thing says you can touch her all you want. She'd especially like it if you'd scratch her neck." Samantha reached up to scratch the mare's neck. but she got the feeling the horse wasn't the only one giving her permission to touch. The expression on the boy's face was hungry. His life must be terribly lonely if people thought he was a demon. His lips were at the same level as her own. It would be so easy to... Holy Sulis, what am I thinking? She turned away abruptly. She cleared her throat, trying to shake off the urge to take the boy behind the bushes and... How did you get a horse, Dad? She asked. I found her when she was only a few hours old. Her mother had been killed by a panther. I brought her home and took care of her. She would have died without me. You poor thing. Samantha scratched Wild Thing's neck again. We're like you and I. We both lost our mothers on the day of our birth. The horse neighed and nuzzled against Samantha. What did she say? The boy looked away. It's kind of embarrassing. Please tell me, when am I going to get another chance to talk to a horse, Dad? Robbie smiled shyly. She said if you're lonely without your mother, maybe I could be your friend, like I'm Wild Thing's friend. That's so sweet. A bubble of warmth formed in the center of her body. I like that. Would you be my friend? The boy's face seemed to glow as he answered. Yes, milady. There's nothing I'd like more. Samantha laughed, feeling giddy with excitement. Come then, my friend, and show me what they sell at a fair. She could barely stop herself from skipping like a small child. Certain he could only be dreaming, Robbie watched the beautiful lady, who wanted him for a friend, examine the woven baskets. These are amazing, aren't they, Robbie? She picked up an ordinary basket and showed it to him. It looks like they're made from weaving strands of straw together. The vendor looked nervously from Robbie to the armed men who were still following him and the lady. The man drew Sulis's star to warn against him, but Robbie was too happy to let it bother him, and the lady was so caught up in the basket she didn't notice. The lady was equally excited about the tin jewelry and beaded purses. It was odd to see anyone excited by such ordinary things, but the lady's delight was infectious, and Robbie found himself constantly grinning. Look at these ribbons, she said, putting down the embroidered shawl she'd been examining and hurrying to the next booth. She picked one up and held it to the side of his head. It's the same color as your stunningly beautiful eyes. Let me buy it for you. I want to thank you for your help in choosing my horse. But, without giving him time to reply, the lady bought the ribbon and insisted he turn around. An indescribable thrill went through him as the lady's fingers combed through his hair and tied it back with the ribbon. She likes horses as much as I do. She doesn't think I'm cursed. Why does she have to be a lady? As darkness fell, they reached the stalls of the food vendors, and Robbie breathed in the delicious scent of meat pies. Are you hungry? The lady asked. Robbie didn't meet her eyes. Of course he hadn't a dram. No, milady, not at all. Go ahead if you are, though. The lady headed for the meat pie vendor. 4 pies, please. Robbie followed her, but wished he could sink into the dirt. Boyden would have had money to buy pies for a pretty girl. The lady paid for the pies and offered 2 to him. I said I wasn't hungry. He looked away as his stomach announced him to be a liar. Of course you are. The lady sounded impatient. I've been with you all day and neither of us has eaten a thing. Please take them. What am I going to do with 4 pies anyway? Robbie hesitated. He'd already accepted the ribbon from her. What would it say about him if he allowed her to buy him pies as well? But he'd never find another person who actually liked him. Thank you, milady. Some day you must let me repay the favor. Count on it. Her eyes sparkled as she bit into the first pie. These are good. As they greedily devoured the pies, the band over by the dance floor started playing in the distance. Music, she asked. Will there be dancing? Of course, milady. I've never seen peasant dancing before. She grabbed his hand and led him towards the music. When they reached the dance floor, the lady smiled with delight. Dance with me? She asked. Milady, I've never really done any dance. Milady pulled him onto the floor. You owe me for the pies, remember? Boyden sat in one of the ale tents with a full mug on the table and Blair Brianstam on his lap, his hand on her plump bottom. He squeezed it, wondering how long it was going to take him to convince her to find some place more private. So when are you going to marry me, Boyden? Blair asked, leaning down to drink from his mug and giving him a nice view of her breasts. He kissed the side of her neck. My father says after harvest he'll give me my own lands. Maybe we could think about getting married then. After harvest, is it? For some reason, Blair seemed angry. Isn't that what you said last year to Arlene? What's Arlene got to do with anything? You don't ever plan on marrying me. You're just saying that so I'll let you have your way with me again. No, of course not. Boyden couldn't imagine why she was in a huff all of a sudden. Arlene told me what you said to her, but I thought she was lying because people were calling her a cheap slut. Blair pushed away from him. That's probably what they're saying about me now. She ran away. Blair, he called after her. Damn women! What set that off? Whores are so much easier to deal with. He picked up his mug and drank deeply. Carrying mugs of ale, Bran and Derry joined him. Bran had a deck of cards. How about a game, Boyd? Bran asked. Boyden clenched his jaw. He hated it when people shortened his name. Bran did it just to annoy him. We saw Blair running off. Maybe you should get yourself a lady instead of a peasant slut. He picked up his mug. What in the seven hells are you talking about? Derry waved Bran off. He's talking about how carrying on with ladies might get to be a family trait. Boyden stared at him, wondering just how much ale he'd already had. You can't tell me you don't know what your brother's been up to all day. I have no brother, Boyden growled, wondering what the worm had done to disgrace him now. Derry laughed. The high-born lady who decided to grace us with her presence can't keep her hands off the runt your father claims as a son. She has him over on the dance floor now. Hoping Bran and Derry were lying, Boyden drained the last of his ale. We'll see about that. Boyden pushed his way through the crowd. Bran and Derry followed, and they hadn't been lying. The worm was making an absolute ass of himself, dancing with a well-dressed lady. A group of girls were laughing and pointing. Others drew Sulis' star. He should know he isn't welcome among decent people. Moving up in the world. I guess that's why you start thinking we're too good for me. Boyden turned and saw Arlene. Even in the darkness, he could see how white her skin was. How dare she throw me over? I might have married her eventually. I have nothing to do with that. I'm not like him. No, I guess not. Don't have enough demon blood to bewitch a lady. If she hadn't fled laughing into the crowd, Boyden would have punched her. He's humiliated me for the last time. I'll kill him for this. Since the lady didn't care, Robbie didn't feel the slightest bit embarrassed that he couldn't dance. She whirled away from him, and he swung her into his arms. She laughed, and he wished the night could last forever. But far too soon the lady stumbled and caught hold of his arm. Should we set one out, my lady? The lady nodded, breathing heavily. I guess I'm more tired than I thought. As Robbie led her back to her retainers, he noticed the grim looks on their faces. The scarred man had joined the two younger ones who'd been following them around. Scarface bowed to the lady. My lady, we have a long ride back. We truly must leave. The lady nodded and turned to Robbie. I had a good time. It was fun. It was the best day of my life. Please don't leave. Please say you'll come again. Yes, my lady. It was fun. I truly wish I could stay longer, but we do have a long ride, and it isn't fair to keep my men any longer, she said, and Robbie cursed her men into the seven hells. The lady, however, let go of his hand. She kissed him on the cheek, caressing his face with her soft lips. Goodbye, Robbie, she said, then followed the scarred man off into the darkness. Robbie touched his cheek, feeling as if he'd just lost the most precious thing in the world. He hurried away from the dance floor before anyone could see him crying. He wiped his eyes as he threaded his way through the now deserted stalls towards Wildling. When he was passing between two stalls, Boyden stepped in front of him. Getting above yourself, worm! Robbie could smell alcohol on his brother's breath. He turned to run, but found two of Boyden's friends blocking his only escape. Boyden punched him in the gut, doubling him over and driving the air out of his lungs. Can't have you forgetting that your kind deserves to be welling with the pigs, not dancing with a lady. Boyden smashed his fist into Robbie's face, whirling him around. He followed it with a vicious uppercut to the kidney. Robbie collapsed against the stall, struggling for breath. Boyden tore the green ribbon out of his hair. Where did you get this? That's mine! Give it to me! Boyden held the ribbon out of reach. And where would you get something like this? Did you steal it? No, give it back. He reached desperately for the lady's gift. Boyden shoved him against the stall wall.
You let that lady buy it for you, didn't you?"
Boyden smashed him in the stomach again. Robbie doubled over, gasping for air. Boyden grabbed him by the hair and yanked him up. He dropped the ribbon at his feet and ground it into the mug. Then he slammed the back of Robbie's head against the wall.
"You've become the lady's whore. Don't you dare talk about her like that."
His protest, coming through gasps of pain, sounded feeble even to him. He despised himself for being unable to defend her better.
"You don't think she actually cared about you, do you? Don't you realize you were just her latest toy?"
Boyden kneed him hard in the groin, and Robbie keeled over in the mud, exploding with pain and rage. He made a dive for Boyden's feet, but he was too slow. Boyden kicked him hard in the chest. Robbie tried to fight, but Boyden had always been bigger and stronger. His brother beat him brutally, all the while making obscene comments about the lady. He'd been in pain countless times before, but he'd never hurt this badly. Every time Boyden knocked him into the mud, he prayed he'd simply leave him there. But Boyden dragged him back to his feet again and again. Robbie grew afraid that his brother meant to beat him to death.
"Please, I didn't."
But Boyden refused to let him explain or offer excuses. Robbie turned desperately to Boyden's friends.
"Please help me. Stop him."
They merely laughed, and Boyden slammed him into the stall wall again. The old wood snapped, sending a jagged chunk into his back. Robbie fell at his brother's feet and coughed up blood. He wished he could die. Boyden kicked him again.
"Have you learned your lesson, worm?"
"Yes, please. Yes."
"Prove it. Crawl over here and lick my boots clean."
Struggling not to vomit, Robbie ran his tongue over the filthy boots. Boyden laughed.
"There's some more a little higher up."
Robbie strained to reach the spot, and Boyden kicked out, slamming Robbie's head into the stall wall. Darkness overtook him at last. When Robbie awoke, it was still dark, but he could no longer hear the music and dancing. He felt something licking his face. Wild Thing was standing over him. It hurt too much to worry about how she'd gotten loose.
"Hello, girl,"
he croaked through swollen lips. He almost didn't recognize his own voice. He tried to rise, but pain shot through him, causing him to collapse back into the mud, the place he certainly belonged.
"Help me, girl,"
he pleaded. Wild Thing tucked her legs under her and sat beside him. As Robbie leaned against the horse's warm side, he saw the green ribbon lying in the muck. He grabbed it. Wild Thing nickered encouragingly. Tucking the lady's present inside his shirt, Robbie boosted himself onto the horse's back. Samantha was exhausted when she finally reached her quarters. Malvina and Ardra had a bath waiting. They helped her off with her clothing and into the warm water. They scrubbed the dirt from her body and washed her hair. "Did you have a good time, Your Highness?" Ardra asked.
"I most certainly did," the princess smiled.
"Lady Sheila was wanting to speak with you, Your Highness," Malvina said. "We told her you were indisposed, like you said." Samantha merely grunted. She wanted to think about a handsome peasant boy, not Lady Sheila. As her maids tucked her into bed, Samantha fell into a pleasant sleep. She laughed with Robbie as they danced the riotous country dances together. Then as the music slowed, Robbie swept her into his arms to dance the slow and sensuous Sonoyan waltz, the one she'd ordered the court orchestra never to play. His body touched every inch of her own. When the dance ended, she took his hand and led him to her rooms. She pulled him down on her bed, and he bent his mouth to hers. Her lips parted, and she teased his tongue with her own. Her breath caught in her throat. She awoke, dripping with sweat. Oh, that's why the other girls giggle.